Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the articles displayed on the screen from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 1st August 2019. So let us start our discussion. Now, in continuation of our series of discussion of the questions that appeared in the preliminary examination from the DNS, let us take up this question. So the question reads, in India, the extended producer responsibility was introduced as an important feature in which of the following? And the options mention the Biomedical Waste Rules 1998, Recycling, Manufacturing and Usage Pulses 1999, the E-Waste Management and Handling Rules 2011, and the Food Safety and Standards Regulation 2011. And in the Daily News Simplified of 12th April 2019, an article was discussed in the context of the solar e-waste. And in this article, it was clearly mentioned that the e-waste rules 2016 strengthens the EPR or the extended producer responsibility to ensure the take back of the end of the life products. Now, these e-waste management rules of 2016 are an improvement over the existing 2011 rules. And this EPR was already introduced in the 2011 rules, and the 2016 rules aims at strengthening these extended producer responsibility rules. And that is why the correct answer here was C option, that is the e-waste management and handling rules 2011 provided for extended producer responsibility. After this, let us take up the discussion of today's newspaper. Now, this article on page number 10 talks about the India-Africa relations and especially about the India's economic aid in Africa and various aspects related to this economic aid. So, this will form a part of the General Studies paper 2 under the topic International Relations. And if you look at the previous year questions, in the year 2015, there was a question directly related to India-Africa relations, and the question read, increasing interest of India in Africa has its pros and cons. Critically examine. So in this background, let us understand the key points which have been highlighted by the author regarding India's economic aid in Africa. So mainly the author in this article has highlighted the difference between India's developmental assistance and the reciprocal economic engagement by Africa. So to highlight the India's developmental assistance, the author has highlighted various trends in the India-Africa relations and the ways in which India has provided assistance to Africa. However, the author has raised the concern that this developmental aid or assistance by the India has not been converted into sustainable engagement between India and Africa. And this relationship looks like a one-off relationship where India is only providing the assistance without a proper and proactive engagement by the African countries. So regarding these trends between India and Africa, the author has highlighted that in the India-Africa Forum Summit in 2015, India agreed to provide concessional credit worth $10 billion. And by the year 2017, India had cumulatively extended 152 lines of credit worth $8 billion to 44 African countries. So this shows the quantum of assistance or the economic assistance which India provides to Africa and various African countries. Further, India unilaterally provides free access to its markets for the exports of 32 least developed countries of Africa. Further, providing a remark on the India's economic engagement in Africa, the author has highlighted that India's economic engagement with Africa is counter-cyclical in nature. This is because India has increased its developmental assistance to Africa even though the commodity prices are low in Africa and they are not fetching good returns for India. And other countries like China have already reduced their developmental assistance to Africa. So this shows the positive intent of India towards the Africa. And further, India's trade with the African countries is around $64 billion in the year 2018 and 19. And recently, India overtook US as the third largest trading partner of Africa. And this investment of India in Africa stood at around $50 billion. So these are few trends in the India-Africa relations. After this, let us understand what are the issues that the author has highlighted regarding this India's economic assistance in Africa. So regarding the economic aid provided by India to Africa, the author has raised the concern that India's developmental engagement with Africa has not produced the required reciprocal economic engagement by Africa. Now, why has the author raised the issue that the engagement with Africa is not producing required reciprocal economic engagement by Africa? This is mainly because India is providing the aid to various intermediaries in the Africa, and these include African Union and others. And the aid that India is providing to the African nations is not mainly of the bilateral nature. And that is why the countries who are getting or receiving this aid are not providing any reciprocal economic engagement with India. Further, the author has highlighted the reasons why India does not have the burden of providing the aid to Africa without expecting any reciprocal economic engagement. Further highlighting the need for this reciprocal engagement by Africa, the author has highlighted that India is neither a rich country and nor India has colonized or exploited Africa in the past. Now, as we all know that European countries had colonized and exploited the resources of Africa, and that is why it becomes a historical burden on those countries to provide humanitarian aid to African countries. However, India has not had such a past with the African countries. And it is in this line that it has been highlighted that India's aid should not be considered by the African countries as entitlement, or this aid from India should not be considered by these African countries as a matter of right. However, they should indulge in a reciprocal behavior and should provide a proper economic engagement with the aid which is being provided by India. So, in this line, the author says that it is required on the Africa's behalf to reciprocate Indian aid with the economic projects in Africa. So, in this background, the author has provided various measures that India needs to take in order to achieve a reciprocal economic engagement with African countries. Now, why India requires this reciprocal engagement by the African countries? Now, this is because India is not a developed country as of yet, and India needs to focus on economic growth through its various investments, and that is why any investment or assistance to the African country should also be helpful in the growth of the country. So, the measures that India needs to undertake for having a reciprocal economic engagement with the African countries and which will indirectly or directly help India's economic growth are following. So, first is that India needs to take the direct control of our developmental programs instead of handing the funds to intermediaries like the African Union, etc. So instead of handing over the funds to intermediaries like African Union, Indian aid should be disbursed bilaterally and should be aligned with the national priorities of the recipient state. Secondly, the Indian developmental assistance should prefer the countries in which India has substantial interest in terms of accepting Indian imports and providing access to raw materials, natural resources, commodities, and large markets. So, these are all indirectly aimed at improving India's growth, and India should provide its developmental assistance to those countries where the economic interest of India lies. Further, India should route its aid through the public sector of these African countries to ensure transparency. Further, the Indian head of the mission in all these recipient states must be an integral part of the aid stream, including project selection, coordination, and implementation. So, the embassies or the missions in the African countries should be involved in various projects for their selection, coordination, and implementation. And these heads of the mission would ensure better harmonization of India's economic interests and its aid. Now, besides focusing on the economic interests of India, India should also continue to fulfill its duty to provide the needed humanitarian assistance to the African countries. So, these are few suggestions which have been provided by the author for having a reciprocal economic engagement with African countries so that it could be beneficial to economic growth of India and should also meet the economic interests of India. And with this, let's move to the next article. Now, this article on page number 15 highlights that the growth of 8 core industries has dropped to only 0.2% in the month of June. And this slowdown in the growth in the core sectors has been mainly due to slowdown in the petroleum oil sector as well as the cement production sector. So, in this article, let us try to understand what is meant by the index of 8 core industries and who releases this index. So this is important for us from preliminary examination point of view under the topic economic development. Now, the growth of industrial sector in India is measured through an index which is known as index of 8 core industries. Now, as compared to this index of 8 core industries, there is another index which is known as index of industrial production or the IIP. Now, these 8 core industries constitute about 40.27% of the weightage in the index of industrial production. And that is why they are the barometer of growth of industrial sector in Indian economy. Now, which are these 8 core sectors which are measured through this index of 8 core industries? So, these include the coal sector, the crude oil sector, natural gas, petroleum refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement, and electricity. Now, another important aspect for us is that who prepares this index of 8 core industries. So, it is prepared by Office of Economic Advisor under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Further, this index is published monthly and it has a base year of 2011 and 12. And all these aspects are important for preliminary examination. Now, besides all these facts, you should also be aware that which industry has the highest weightage as well as the lowest weightage. So, the highest weightage is for the petroleum refinery production and the lowest weightage is for the fertilizers production. Now, as we know that the index of 8 core industries is published by the Office of Economic Advisor under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, you should also be aware that the index of industrial production is prepared by National Statistical Office under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So these are few important facts related to the index of 8 core industries, and at the end of today's discussion you will find a preliminary examination question related to this section. With this, let's move to the next article. Now, this editorial on page number 10 talks about various technical issues with the Triple Talaq bill, which has been recently passed by Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. So, this will fall under the General Studies paper 2 under the topic Governance and Social Issues. Now, the key provisions of the Triple Talaq bill have been provided in the PDF which is attached to this video. However, let us look at the points which have been highlighted by this editorial. Now, the first issue regarding the Triple Talaq bill is that the Supreme Court had already declared this practice of Triple Talaq as invalid in one of its rulings. Further, such a practice of Triple Talaq does not have the approval of the Islamic tenets, or it has not been recognized by the Islamic rules and regulations. So, in this line, the editorial highlights that was there really a need to bring in a new law to criminalize the Triple Talaq? Further, the editorial highlights that generally the children's custody and subsistence allowance to the women are provided only in case a divorce has been finalized in other religions and other types of marriages. However, the provisions of the Triple Talaq bill allow a woman to claim a subsistence allowance and seek the custody of her children even when the marriage has not been declared invalid under this law. So, even when the marriage subsists or the marriage has not been declared as void, the woman can claim the subsistence allowance or seek the custody of her children from the man. Now, how this provision will be implemented is not clear as of now, and such a loophole in the bill has chances of being exploited. Further, there are provisions for the arrest of a man who indulges into the practice of triple talaq. Now, how a man who is imprisoned can provide the subsistence allowance has been questioned by this editorial. This is because a man who has been imprisoned will generally not have any means of employment or source of earning. So, in such a scenario, how is it possible for that man to provide the subsistence allowance to the women? Now, this is a unique situation where the marriage has not been annulled and the provisions for subsistence allowance and the custody of children have been provided. Now, the supporters of the bill have provided that the provisions like dowry harassment and cruelty towards wives are applicable even when the marriage is not declared void. However, the editorial in this line argues that it's a wrong comparison as those acts involve violence and cruelty and are rightly treated as criminal offenses. However, the same cannot be said of a man who is invoking a prohibited form of divorce, and because he has not directly indulged into violence or cruelty. So, in this line, the editorial highlights that the larger issue is that of abandoning of wives and children by the man even without getting a divorce. And this issue needs to be resolved. For this, it has been highlighted that India needs a non-sectarian, gender-neutral law which addresses the abandoning of wives and children. So these are few issues with the present form in which the Triple Talaq bill has been passed by the Parliament. With this, let's move to the next article. Now, this article on page number 11 talks about the utility of farm ponds in transforming the rural livelihoods. Now, this will form a part of the General Studies paper 3 under the topic different types of irrigation and irrigation system storage. Now, the importance of farm ponds have been highlighted in the background of depleting groundwater resources in various parts of India. And also, these farm ponds are relevant for drought affected areas like Bundelkhand, Vidarbha, and Marathwada. And further, time and again, the Prime Minister of India as well as the Niti Aayog have highlighted the need for adopting innovative water management measures. And all these water management measures should be based on the importance of rainwater harvesting at the household and the community levels. So in this background, let us understand the importance of the farm ponds and how they help in improving the groundwater table and how are they effective tools for rainwater harvesting. Now simply the farm ponds are structures which are constructed on the agricultural lands which are wide as compared to the wells and are shallower in the depth. And due to this, they can act as effective rainwater harvesting structures. Further, they help in enhancing water control and they contribute to the agricultural intensification because of rainwater harvesting. Further, as these farm ponds can act as rainwater harvesting structures, these can act as recharge points for groundwater and can contribute to the replenishment of groundwater or improvement in the groundwater table. Further, these can help in providing supplemental irrigation in the Kharif and can also provide irrigation coverage or improve the irrigation coverage during the Rabi season, which is the winter season. Now, as these ponds can retain water for 8 to 10 months of an year, farmers can enhance the cropping intensity and can also experiment with crop diversification within and across seasons. Further, these farm ponds are financially viable because the benefits that are likely to arise from the construction of such farm ponds outweigh the costs that are incurred during the construction. Now, although the farm ponds have various benefits, the current way in which these are being constructed are raising certain issues. So, the authors have highlighted certain wrong practices which could accelerate the depletion of groundwater rather than rainwater harvesting and the replenishment of the groundwater. So in this line, they have highlighted that most of the ponds are being constructed with walls raised above the ground surface. And as such, there is no inlet for excess water to be harvested during the rainfall season. Now, this limits the utility of farm ponds in rainwater harvesting. Finally, the farmers line the bottoms of such farm ponds with plastics. And this restricts the seepage of water into the ground. And this converts the farm ponds into intermediate storage points, and these are called as intermediate storage points because the water is lifted from either wells or canals and stored in these farm ponds. So these are not effectively used as rainwater harvesting structures. Now, since the farm ponds, which are intermediate storage points, do not act as rainwater harvesting structures, these accelerate groundwater depletion and increase the evaporation losses because there is no provision for seepage of water in such ponds. Now, these points are pretty straightforward and simple. However, they can be used in writing answers related to improvement or innovations in the irrigation structures. So, this can be one of the important points that you can mention there. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 18 talks about the Sanchi Stupa. And this can be important for us from the General Studies paper 1 under the topic Indian Art and Culture. And also, it is very important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. So let us look at some key points related to the Sanchi Stupa from the NCERT of class 11th, which is known as the Introduction to Indian Art. Now the NCERT of class 11th with the name Introduction to Indian Art talks about the various aspects of Indian art and culture, and in particular it talks about the chronological order in which the Indian art developed. So it talks about the various phases, for example the Indus Valley civilization, the modern art and the post-modern art. And in this book, the temple architecture has been widely discussed. So you should go through this NCERT to understand the various aspects of Indian art and culture which are important for us from preliminary as well as mains examination point of view. So now from the chapter 3rd of this NCERT, let us look at the various aspects of the Sanchi Stupa and what are the features of a stupa. Now the stupas are said to be constructed over the relics of Lord Buddha. And in this picture you can see the various architectural aspects of a stupa. Now this Sanchi Stupa is located close to Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh. And if you look at the architectural details, you can find that there is a circumambulatory path which is known as the Pradakshin Patha. Further, the 4 gates of entrance for this stupa are known as the Toranas. And on these Toranas or the entrance gates, various events from the life of Lord Buddha as well as Jataka stories have been decorated and depicted. So the Sanchi is about 50 kilometers from Bhopal in the Madhya Pradesh. And this site Sanchi has many stupas, and of which 3 stupas are the most important one. And the stupa which has been designated as Stupa 1 is presumed to have the relics of Lord Buddha. Further, very close to this stupa, an Ashokan lion capital pillar with inscription is found. So this is another important fact related to the location of Sanchi Stupa. Now, one unique feature of the Sanchi Stupa is that there are 2 Pradakshin Pathas which are present here. And it is the only and unique site which has a upper Pradakshina Patha or circumambulatory path along with the lower circumambulatory path. Now the four gateways which are known as the Toranas are decorated and Lord Buddha is depicted symbolically on these Toranas. And he has been depicted symbolically such as an empty throne with his feet, chhatra and stupas etc. And on these Toranas there are guardian images which are known as the Shalabhanjikas or the ladies which are holding the branches of a tree. So this is also another important aspect of this Sanchi Stupa. And each Toran gate has two vertical pillars with three horizontal bars as can be seen in this picture. So these were a few important points related to the Stupa at Sanchi. And for other details regarding the Indian art and culture, you can go through the NCERT of Fine Arts of 11th class. With this, let's move to the next article. Now, this editorial on page number 10 highlights the widespread deforestation that is happening due to the policies of the new government in Brazil in Amazon forests. Now, in this editorial, what is important for us is the location of the Amazon forest and the Amazon river, and that too from preliminary examination point of view. So if you look at the map of South America, you will find that Amazon river and the Amazon forests are located in the country of Brazil and is spread over various other countries like Colombia, Guyana, etc. And if you look at the course of the river Brazil, it flows into the Atlantic Ocean. And regarding Amazon, you should note that it is the world's largest river in terms of the discharge of volume of water. Now further, this editorial talks about a fund for the conservation of Amazon forest. And this fund is famously known as the Amazon Fund or the Fundo Amazonia. Now this is administered by the Brazilian Development Bank or the BNDES. And the area of focus of this Amazon Fund is the mitigation strategies for the deforestation. And regarding the REDD, you should note that it is the United Nations program on reducing the emissions from the deforestation and forest degradation. And that is why it is known as the UN RED program or the UN REDD program. Further, it is a collaborative program of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, that is FAO, the United Nations Development Program UNDP, and the United Nations Environment Program or the UNEP. So this can be an important fact for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And this Amazon Fund was created to raise the donations so that investments can be made in the efforts to prevent, monitor and combat deforestation, as well as to promote the conservation and sustainable use of forests in the Amazon biome. So in this article, we have only understood some of the important facts for us from the preliminary examination point of view. With this, let's move to the next article. Now, after today's discussion, let us take up these practice questions. And the answer for these questions will be displayed after 5 seconds. Now, the first question reads, which of the following sectors are included in the index of 8 core industries? Now, as we have learned in today's article, the mining sector is not included in the index of 8 core industries. However, the fertilizer sector and the electricity sector are included. So if you look at the answers, you will find that the correct answer is 1 and 3, that is the option B. Now after this, let us take up the second question, which reads, consider the following statements. The first statement is, Index of 8 core industries is published by the Office of Economic Advisor under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So this statement is correct. The second statement reads, the Index of Industrial Production or the IIP is released by the National Statistical Office under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now here you should note that earlier the IIP was released by the Central Statistical Office. However, recently this Central Statistical Office was merged with the National Sample Survey Organization to create the National Statistical Office. So presently the IIP is released by the National Statistical Office. So the statement 2 is also correct. Hence here the correct answer is C, that is both the statements 1 and 2 are correct. After this you should try both these questions and the answer will be displayed after 5 seconds. Now this question reads, consider the following statements about Sanchi Stupa. The first is that the Toranas are depicting life events of Lord Buddha and various Jataka stories. Now this statement is correct. As we have learned, the Sanchi Stupa has 4 Toranas and on all these Toranas, various life events of Lord Buddha have been depicted and also they depict the Jataka stories. The second statement reads, an Ashokan lion capital pillar with an inscription has been found near the Sanchi Stupa. This statement is also correct as we have learned in the NCERT. Hence the correct answer here is C, that is both the statements 1 and 2 are correct. The next question reads, consider the following statements. The first statement is that Amazon Fund was created at the Paris Summit of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to conserve the Amazon forests. Now this statement is incorrect because the Amazon Fund was created in the year 2009. However, the Paris Summit of UNFCCC took place in the year 2015. That is why this statement is incorrect. The second statement is that it is administered by the Global Environment Facility, which is also incorrect. This is because it is administered by the Brazilian Development Bank. So the correct answer here is D, that is neither the statement 1 nor the statement 2 are correct. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let's move on to the question for the day.